So we try to get people into their genius zones that will move the needle and to shed everything that isn't that. Anything that anyone else can do better, faster, and cheaper than you can, we've got to shed that. Not only so you can grow your business, but mainly so you can get your life back, get your soul back, and to recover from burnout. So this guy went from 60 to 70 hours a week. Now he works 20 hours a week. He works 2.5 days a week. But
Probably gets more done too.
those 2.5 hours are 80 to 90% in his genius zone. And his business has taken off. It's doubled. And he's working many less hours. And he takes, in fact, as we record this, it's in his goal was to buy a house in Breckenridge, which he did, Colorado. And that's where he is. And he's taking, it's either 2 or 3 weeks completely away from business. He doesn't answer email or his phone calls. And he's got a business that is way more valuable, not only monetarily, but if you wanted to sell it, it's really worth something, because it's not dependent on him.
Welcome to the Value Factory Podcast, brought to you by One Accord. We're all about helping businesses thrive and grow through leadership, strategy, and meaningful impact. Now, whether you're a seasoned executive or just starting out, our goal is to provide insights and inspiration to help you navigate your journey. Thanks for tuning in.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Value Factory presented by One Accord. I'm your host, Andrew Ballard. We've got a great topic and guest today, and we're going to discuss how to prevent and recover from burnout, not only quickly, but also permanently. It's going to be a great conversation. And let me introduce you all to Scott Anderson. He is an author, speaker, a serial entrepreneur. And when I say a serial entrepreneur, I'm not exaggerating. He's launched 10 companies and sold 8 of them, and he has the scar tissue to prove it. Scott helps high-performance business owners and their leadership teams grow quickly and not lose their minds or sell their souls in doing so. He has a great book that I've already cracked. It's You're Not Toast, and it talks about his breakthrough burnout system. And I think there's 5 different strategies there, but I've already started it. It's a great book. And Scott, welcome. Thank you for making time for us today. It's great to see you.
My pleasure, Andrew. Good to see you too.
Awesome. Okay. So let's dive right into it. Kind of the tagline here is you're causing your own burnout. Stop it.
Yes.
So talk a little bit, Scott, about how people are, generating their own burnout. I know they're
absolutely
stressed, they're overwhelmed, and anyway.
Yeah. Well, 2 things. One is a sort of to set the stage. Burnout is, we hear the words every day in memes and social media and in conversation, and everybody says they're burned out from time to time. One of my children once told me they're burned out on geography when they're in the 4th grade. So burnout is kind of a overused term, but there is a clinical definition to it. And I should add that in addition to being a coach and a writer and so forth, I'm also a licensed mental health therapist. And burnout has a clinical definition as defined by the World Health Organization and the AMA. And in fact, I'll include in the show notes, I'll include a link to a burnout assessment that your viewers and listeners can take. But burnout has a very specific clinical definition, and it may not be exactly what everybody listening or watching thinks it is. But the hallmarks of it is, the first thing that people notice, usually the canary in the coal mine, is the kind of exhaustion that you would normally have expected to recover from after a good night's sleep. But you wake up in the morning and in fact, you're just as exhausted as when you went to bed. That's one of the hallmarks of burnout. And if your listeners and viewers will take this online assessment, it gives them a way to go through the checklist of what burnout actually is. But I got to a point myself where I'd wake up in the morning just as tired as when I went to bed. And it reminded me a lot of the Bill Murray movie Groundhog's Day, if you remember that, where he would wake up every morning and Sonny and Cher would be on the radio and he would think, oh my God, how am I going to get out of bed one more day at 6:30 a.m. with the alarm going off? And that's exactly what I experienced and what thousands of people across the country are experiencing. The Gallup people tell us that 40% of the American workforce says that they are mostly or always feeling the symptoms of burnout that I talked about. So it's really an epidemic, and it got worse over COVID. So the question is, what do we do about it? And to your point, the headline, I guess, for everything I want to say now is that burnout is, with rare exceptions, is that we cause our own burnout. There are definitely people who work in environments that are toxic or racist or misogynistic or otherwise unfair and unjust. And if you work in an environment like that, as I always say, you should run away screaming. But having worked with thousands of business owners and executives who are burned out, it's not the predominant cause of burnout. For 80% of the people, maybe 90% of the people that we work with, we are causing our own burnout. And there are two primary ways that we do that. One of them is perfectionism, and the other is no boundaries. And those two traits together can make you a very successful person. Being a perfectionist who's willing to work harder and longer than anybody else and take on the work of everybody else and take responsibility for everybody else will get you promoted. And if you're running your own business, it'll win you a lot of business. But it's not a sustainable business strategy, and it's not. Yeah, at what cost? Exactly. And this is when I say our objective is to help people not lose their minds or sell their souls. And that's really what burnout is. We don't do this intentionally. Most of us just stumble into it, but we perfectionists with no boundaries find that it's the recipe for success. It's a superpower. But for most of us who are experiencing burnout, that superpower is turned to kryptonite. And that's the cost. Exactly. It starts to cost us at work with the exhaustion that I'm talking about. And also the fear that sooner or later, the people who work for me are going to see behind the cape I'm wearing and realize that I'm actually falling apart. And then at home, our loved ones begin to ask, you're with us, but you're not here.
Right.
You're physically here, but you're not with us. And my clients get into kind of this zero-sum game question of, do I succeed at work or succeed at home? I can't have both. So which one am I going to choose? And so that's the point of departure for the book. We're causing our own burnout so we can cure our own burnout. And that's the good news.
Well, I'm not only the hair club president, I'm also a client. I remember my very first CEO gig. I was 35 years old and frankly not prepared. And I did. It first one in, last one out. And we had tremendous success.
Sure.
It was a turnaround. We really dug
Yes.
ourselves out of a hole, but it cost my family. And I was traveling a lot, and if I could go back in time, I would change that because my burnout hurt my family. So everything you're saying resonates with me, and it's hilarious. You talk about perfectionism and no boundaries. And to me, it's almost an oxymoron because
Yeah.
if you are perfect, you do have boundaries, but I
Right.
know what you're talking about. And it's
the tension, it's the snake eating its own tail. Perfectionism is not possible. Perfection is not possible. I mean, that's the
right.
fundamental lie, but the pursuit of it can make us very competitive in business and very successful financially. But again, as you say, at what cost? And the fear is, though, that if I let off the gas in either of those areas, if I back off of perfectionism or if I back off of no boundaries, we become superstitiously attached to this. The fear is if I don't do all of that, then my business will fall apart or my career will fall apart, even as most of us find our family lives are in fact falling apart.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It does come at great cost. And I think you're in the process of answering this, but I want to dig a little deeper. People are always talking, especially leaders, talking about being burned out. But what is it really? I mean, I've got the perfectionism and the no boundaries, and we all know what a disaster that can be. Dive a little deeper into what being burned out really, what it's
Sure.
really about.
Sure. I'll use the example of one of our clients who was working 60, 70 hours a week to he felt like he had to single-handedly lift his business up. And a lot of people found that COVID really became kind of exaggerated all of the factors which contribute to burnout. But anyway, this guy was running a family business, and which is, as they say, the road to hell is paved with family businesses. I've been in a couple of them. And it's a very hard row to hoe. And he was a third generation owner of a successful family business. but he was working 60 to 70 hours a week. He was missing his family. His family was asking the same question that, that my wife asked me, you're with us, but you're not present. And, he got to this point where, first of all, he took on all of the responsibility for everything. And this is the limitation of perfectionism and no boundaries, is that you can't build a business bigger than you. You can only build a business that is, that there's 24 hours in a day. There's only so many hours you can work. There's only so much worrying and caring and so on you can do. So, what he found was that a couple of things. He had a revolving door of employees. He would bring in top talent, but the top talent would soon see that they would be micromanaged and that they wouldn't really be given the freedom to run their businesses and do the work that they wanted to do to make their own mark. And so he had a revolving door of very talented people. And his business earned a reputation as being a sweatshop and as being a place that looked like it would have opportunity, but really didn't have opportunity. As a burned out person, he was also not treating them well. One of the hallmarks of burnout is a sort of victimhood where you begin to imagine it's them. It's my customers, it's my employees, it's my investors, it's my banker. Exactly. And these are people who previously were, just incredibly resolute and would accept responsibility for everything. But it's taking all of this to an extreme, and ultimately it comes out the other side as victimhood. Anyway, so he kept working harder and harder and harder because he couldn't retain the talent that he needed to retain. And he began to realize, there's a point where I can't work anymore than 60 or 70 hours. I just can't do it. And he just saw no light at the end of the tunnel. And he began to worry, like Bill Murray in Groundhog's Day, what if one day I can't get out of bed? What if one day I don't answer the bell? Sonny and Cher's on the alarm clock and I can't get out of bed. And that was the wall I hit personally. I began to really worry, one day I may not be able to get out of bed. And if I can't get out of bed, then the wheels fall off of this business pretty damn fast. Mm-hmm. So this was the wall that he hit, that I hit. Sounds like you did at one point, Andrew.
Yes.
And at that point, we either there's a big dose of humility, first of all, that we have to accept about our own human limitations and about our own shortcomings, and also just the reality that there's two options here. I'm either going to die at my desk, or we're going to have to try something new. And that's the conclusion that most of my clients ultimately reach. And when they call us and they inquire about the Burnout Breakthrough System, it's not their first choice. They've tried everything else because they've really bet the house literally on perfectionism and working harder and working harder and working harder. But it gets a point where you figure, I'm either going to die at my desk or choose something new. And to choose something new is, a lot of the work that you do with your clients, Andrew, but it has to do with creating systems, with creating real scale and systematic value, versus to run a business based on principles versus the personality of the owner founder. It takes some humility, but sometimes, this is a real blow to our egos, a lot of us, but in retrospect, I see it as a tremendous blessing. But anyway, that's what happens. And, we get engaged with clients at that stage. And fortunately, the process to recover from and even prevent burnout, which is really our ultimate goal, is a pretty straightforward process. There are a lot of counterintuitive actions that people don't just naturally gravitate to, because for us, the answer is always, I'm going to work harder and care more than anybody else.
And those are the 5 steps that I kind of teased earlier.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, exactly. Sure. Well, one of the most important ones, and it's counterintuitive as it can be, is, and I'll send you a link to a technique we call the R&R technique. And it's sort of meditation for people who can't meditate, and which includes almost all of my clients and me for that matter, because, most of us are afraid of, if I had 15 minutes to burn on meditation, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? But I don't have 15 minutes to spare. So this is a 5-second technique that's clinically based. There's lots of research around it, called the R&R technique. And basically the first step is to notice that you're stressed out. And this is something that most of us don't want to look at because we're afraid if I spend any time looking into the abyss of where I am, I might not get out of bed. But the first step, and this is the counterintuitive part, is just to notice that I'm stressed out. And by notice, I don't mean worry about everything in the past and the future, but just to scan your body and notice, where do I feel this? Where am I noticing this? And it's typically in the gut, the heart, the chest, the shoulders, the neck for most people. So that's number one. Just notice that you're feeling overwhelmed or that you're feeling stressed, not intellectually. Don't try to figure it out. That's where the whole problem is. Instead, just find the sensation in the body that's sort of the analog for the feeling that you're having in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So just notice where you feel it. Let's say your gut. The second step in the R&R technique, and it's going to take about 10 times longer for me to explain the technique than it is for you to actually do it. This technique only takes 5 or 10 seconds. But anyway, first is just to notice where you feel it. Let's say the gut. The second step is to inhale through your nose, hold it for a beat, and exhale through your mouth, and visualize the energy wherever you find it, your stomach, let's say. Imagine it leaving. That's it. Imagine a door opening and the energy leaving. And
It's
really,
like you're
when you boil it
cleansing your
all,
body of that stress.
exactly.
Hey, everybody. Nick Anderson, CEO of One Accord. Thank you for listening in to today's episode of The Value Factory. I hope that you're getting value from this episode. Now, listen, one of the primary ways that we support CEOs at One Accord is using Oasis, the One Accord system. It's our proprietary business operating system that's designed to shift your leadership team from reactive firefighting to focused execution. We provide the framework that will align your vision with your strategy, ensuring sustainable growth and clarity at every level of your organization. To learn how One Accord can support your company today, click the link in the show notes or our bio and get connected with one of our senior leaders. And now back to the show.
And again, this doesn't require any effort at all. And the more you do it, the easier it will come. And the more often you do it, the more relief you'll get. But in the very beginning of my own burnout, this was all I had. I went back to graduate school training when I was getting my clinical counseling degree, and I was looking for techniques that specifically address this. And there's not too much in the literature, but I found this one technique and I used it because I had nothing else at my disposal. I had tried working harder. I had tried everything else. Nothing seemed to work. So I tried this in desperation. And it's counterintuitive because the idea of just finding it in your body, what your mind says is, no, we have to solve this. We have to think and think and think about it. So it's counterintuitive to just feel it physically. But anyway, that's it. It's a 5 or 10 second technique. And it's just notice that you're disturbed, find it in your body, inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth, and visualize a door opening. I think of like a summer fire hydrant is sort of the visual that I think of back in the day when they used to open the fire hydrants and the energy, I imagine, is gushing out. And that's all there is to it. And if you do that 5 or 10 times a day, and that's what I did 5 times a day, I guess. In the beginning, that was the first 2 weeks of my own personal recovery. And that by itself, it's not a complete answer, but it's a huge step in the right direction. But it's just as counterintuitive as it can possibly be. Another one, but a lot of it has to do with to look at the thing you're afraid of square in the eye. Most of us have a fear that's driven us, kind of like a cowboy drives a horse by driving spurs into the side of the horse. But by the time people get to me, their horses have bloody sides from being spurred and spurred and spurred. And so most of us don't want to look at the thing that drives us is, in most cases, it's a fear of failure, a fear of going broke for a lot of us entrepreneurs. And it's a pretty deep fear. And the last thing we want to do is look at it. But all of the techniques in our method involve looking at the thing we're afraid of in the most gentle, unthreatening way we possibly can. And that really is the beginning of the end of burnout, when you can look at what you're afraid of and just let it go, like that R&R technique. That really is the answer. There's a lot more to the program than that, but that's the counterintuitive part of it, is to actually look at the thing we're afraid of. It's like as a kid looking under the bed for the monster that we're afraid is there and discovering that there's just socks. That's all that's there under the bed. But we kind of have to see that in order for the momentum to shift.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. And you've talked about this, and it's even, I believe, referenced in the book, that this burnout happens especially to business owners trying to build a big business. My guess is they feel like they have even more pressure on their shoulders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the problem with a big business, if you want to move from being a small to medium-sized business to being a bigger business, if you want, what I found is that for me and for most of our clients, they hit a plateau of some kind. And it's typically a sales plateau, but it can also be a net profit plateau, where no matter how hard they work and how hard they try, they can't break through a certain ceiling. And that's usually the thing that my clients have hit their heads bloody against the ceiling trying to break through. And it's not that they can't break through, but it's, and I'll refer to your book too. It's your opinion doesn't matter. And my opinion was always, well, I've just got to work harder, and that's how I'm going to break through the ceiling. And that's not how we're going to do it. But
Like
that's
you
what
said, it's
happens.
counterintuitive.
Exactly. And, so much of it, and actually the key is not working harder, it's working less hard. The client that I mentioned who was working 60 to 70 hours a week, we did what's called a genius zone process. We went through a list of all the things that he does that only he can do and that will move the needle for his business farther and faster than anything else. And in most CEOs, it's a combination of working with top clients, coaching his leadership team, and setting a vision. So I asked him, I want you to take a yellow highlighter and highlight everything in your calendar that has anything to do with visioning, coaching, or working with your top clients. And he found
Probably not much there.
yeah, there was an hour a week on a good week. And I said, I think we found the problem. The reason your business isn't growing is because there are other issues, but one of the main ones is you're not spending any time doing the things that will grow your business. You're spending a lot of time doing other people's jobs, worrying about other people, et cetera, et cetera. But so we try to get people into their genius zones that will move the needle and to shed everything that isn't that. Anything that anyone else can do better, faster, and cheaper than you can, we've got to shed that. Not only so you can grow your business, but mainly so you can get your life back, get your soul back, and to recover from burnout. So this guy went from 60 to 70 hours a week. Now he works 20 hours a week. He works 2.5 days a week. But
Probably gets more done too.
those 2.5 hours are 80 to 90% in his genius zone. And his business has taken off. It's doubled. And he's working many less hours. And he takes, in fact, as we record this, it's in his goal was to buy a house in Breckenridge, which he did, Colorado. And that's where he is. And he's taking, it's either 2 or 3 weeks completely away from business. He doesn't answer email or his phone calls. And he's got a business that is way more valuable, not only monetarily, but if you wanted to sell it, it's really worth something because it's not dependent on him.
Right. And that's one of the big value killers is when the business is so dependent on the owner, founder,
Exactly.
CEO, and they just, they get to the point where they think they're the only one. They dilute themselves into
Yes.
thinking they're the only one that can get all this done. And it's absolutely not true. And it sounds like to me from listening to you, Scott, that you really have to hit bottom before you realize how bad it is. I'm not analogizing it to, say, someone with substance abuse, but usually there is an event in their life where they just hit bottom and then they are open to change and, pay attention
That's
to
right.
what's going on.
Yeah, and unfortunately that is true. And what I wish for everybody listening to this is a higher bottom. It really isn't necessary to go all the way to the bitter end and jeopardize your health or jeopardize your marriage or jeopardize your relationship with the people you love most. It's really possible to turn this all around, and you can start right now today. And the reality also is, and I think most small business owners, at least, or small to medium-sized business owners, get this intellectually at least, is that if they're going to have the business that they really want, one that isn't killing them and one that they could ultimately sell if they wanted to, it's got to be bigger than them. I think we all get that intellectually. To get that emotionally, though, and to understand the emotional piece of it, does require sometimes some pain. But I hope, at a minimum, I hope what people will do is at least read the book, and because I think what you'll find in there is just a lot of hope. That's the reason that I wrote it. My life completely turned around. Not only did I shed burnout, but I was really able to build businesses that made sense, that I could sell at a premium versus, killing myself at my desk and running the risk of losing my family and my sanity. So, I would ask people if they're on the fence or they're just even suspicious, maybe there's a better way to live. There's an infinitely better way to live and to grow the business that you want that will really work, that's sustainable. And you can really break through these habits, as calcified as they may seem, in a surprisingly short amount of time. Within 2 or 3 weeks of just using some of the techniques, you're going to feel a lot better and begin to realize, there is another way. I don't have to bottom out, as you say. I don't have to blow up my life. I don't have to ruin my marriage or my family or my business. It's possible to really have the best of both worlds.
Well, your story about your Breckenridge CEO not even answering the phone or emails,
Yeah,
that's the sign of success. I mean, when
exactly.
you can leave the operation for a month plus and everything runs very smoothly, you've got the business operating systems in place,
Yes.
you've got a capable team leading and continuing to run the business and advance it forward. So, my guess, Scott, is that there's kind of a root cause as to how people cause their own burnout. So, how is that? How is that happening, and how can they stop it?
Yeah. Well, again, the root cause for most of us, nobody intends to burn out, I don't think. And it isn't like any of this is a moral failing. For most of us, what it is that we just sort of stumble into the fact that if we work harder than other people and take on more responsibility than other people, then our careers tend to advance more quickly. We tend to have success, and it's not necessarily intentional. It's just something we stumble into. Many of us discover this in school to begin with, or sometimes in athletics, or a combination of that. We discover this fairly early on is that I've had a lot of my clients are very successful people say, I may not be the smartest, but I'm going to outwork anybody around me. And it isn't none of us intend to burn out. It's just that we stumble into this and we find that it works. And it does work, as we've said, but it ultimately does not, it's not sustainable. It'll work to a certain point and then it stops working.
So, can you stop this cycle, stop this burnout before you hit bottom?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And this is why I encourage people to buy the book or just watch any of our content on social media is that what you'll see in the forms of our clients telling their stories is that what they thought they would. A lot of people figure that the only way to not burn out, or as I say, it feels like a choice between succeed at work or succeed at home. Pick one. And it feels like that's the sort of existential choice that you can't have both. Or it feels like, yeah, for me to succeed at home means I'm going to have to take my foot off the gas at work. Instead of having the big business that I want, I can't have that. I'll have to have a okay business or a so-so business or a so-so lifestyle or so-so income. That's the illusion. This is why I really encourage people to check out some of the book or the social media content, because the fact is, as our clients say, is that it's not only is it possible to have both, but really the only way to have both is to kind of surrender, from it's one of those things where the good is the enemy of the best. And
Right.
working yourself to death and being a perfectionist and never saying no is the good answer, but it's not the best. And ultimately you will run out of your own resources. So what I ask people to do, even if they're not completely burned out, and those are the folks I really want to talk to today, is to at least consider, there's another way where that I can explore. I don't have to abandon everything today, but I can at least explore another way of looking at business. I mean, so much of this has to do, frankly, with a runaway ego that a lot of us have, not because we're bad people, but simply because we get rewarded for doing some of these things, at least initially. And it feels like, wow, I did that, and if I keep doing more of that, I'll keep getting more of this.
Right.
So it's understandable.
Hey, everybody, Nick Anderson again. I hope that you are getting value from this episode of The Value Factory. Thanks for listening in. Now, listen, to build a high-performing organization, you must have a talent strategy, a strategy that attracts and retains the right leaders for your culture. Now, at One Accord, we help you reduce turnover and align your team's capabilities with your long-term growth goals to ensure that your vision is carried forward effectively. To learn how One Accord can support your company today, click the link in the show notes or our bio and get connected to one of our senior leaders. Now back to the show.
Well, and as I'm listening to this, I would even recommend that people read this before they get into the C-suite.
Yeah,
I mean, if they're on a trajectory of advancing their career path, I mean, experiencing this and those 5 counterintuitive things you talk about in the book could actually be a prevention mechanism.
absolutely.
The old saying, the farther upstream you prevent the issue, the less expensive downstream it's going to be. And you also, Scott, talked earlier, about 20 minutes ago, you were talking about the revolving door of your staff. And we both know that replacing an employee, especially a key person, is significantly more than retaining them. In fact, in your book, you ask a great question. Is everyone really replaceable? And you talk about the $200,000 to $2 million cost in replacing a key person. Talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah. The opportunity for business owners and business leaders generally, I think, in this idea is that not only do we not have to burn out ourselves, and then we can, by using some simple techniques, achieve a more sustainable mindset that will actually take us farther and faster than working all the time. But what's just as important is, as leaders, is to help our teams also to prevent them from going into burnout, or if they're in burnout, to help them escape it. So, we work with a lot of business owners who have team members that are tremendous contributors who may even be thought of as essential to the business. I'm thinking of one client right now who has somebody on their team that is absolutely essential for, they do a lot of governmental contract work, and it's essential to the business. And but the individual's experiencing burnout, and as a result is not performing at their best anymore. And the kind of the go-to for a lot of business owners is, well, you know, nobody's irreplaceable. It'll be painful, but we'll find somebody else. And what I found, especially in the current workforce environment, first of all, it's true, I suppose. If we're willing to spend enough money, we can and roll the dice on the losses that we might take, losing customers, losing other employees. Yeah, we can replace anybody. It's true. But on the other hand, it's if you can follow a certain set of principles that we're talking about, it's possible in a lot of cases to help people, to not only help them prevent burnout, but if they're in it, to recover from it. So, for example, we're working with an essential employee for one of our clients with the Burnout Breakthrough Program. And what he's finding, what the individual is burning out is finding, is that there is another way that they can go. They want to change some of their behavior that's causing friction in the business. They don't want to lose their position. This is a good opportunity, and they don't want to burn out. They begin to realize this is me. It's an inside job. I have to fix this. So we provide the tools to do that. The cost of replacing people is not nothing. I'll send you, I think I have sent you we have a calculator. It's called the replacement calculator.
The link.
Yeah. And basically it allows you to put in your own numbers and see what the actual cost is of losing a key person. It's not nothing. Our estimate is for small to medium sized businesses is that the cost of replacing a key employee is anywhere from $200,000 to $2 million. And it's not just the cost of the recruiter and signing bonuses and all of that, but it's the missed opportunity of losing a customer, or of losing an employee, or losing customers, or losing other employees that follow that key employee out the door. So if there is a way to save $200,000 by spending a tiny fraction of that on a recovery program that's proven to work, that's basically our business proposition. And but I'd ask people to think about, are people really irreplaceable, or rather, are they not? The statement is everyone's replaceable, and that may be. But I'd ask people to think it through and maybe use this calculator, because it's true they're replaceable, but there's, just like burnout, there can be a really high cost. And if there's a way to turn this around and save 200,000 or more, isn't it worth it to at least try?
Right. And by the way, for our audience, Scott's company is called Double Dare. And I believe the URL is Double Dare U.
Yes. Yeah. Double Dare YOU.us. I call it that because actually I was working with my own coach when I started the business, and to get me to do things that felt risky, she would often double dare me to do them. And so we do that with a lot of our clients is, if there's a big opportunity, a lot of times we'll double dare people to do things because, so often and breaking through burnout is a perfect example. I have these two options. I can die at my desk and risk my marriage, or I can try this 5-second meditation technique. Which should I do? And it seems silly to compare those two things, but that's kind of the comparison that sometimes we make. I could lose my marriage and lose my mind, or I can try this meditation technique, this 5-second technique. And so what we do a lot of times is double dare people to do it. Just try it I double dare you to try it for 2 weeks. Just see what happens. See if you can do it.
I can imagine the R&R technique would probably be really effective right as you're at bedtime to kind of take things down a notch and help you get to sleep sooner. I know that when I'm really stressed out or something isn't going the way that I want to in our business, I have a hard time or a more difficult time falling asleep. Also, another thing in the book that you do is you debunk the academy's position of every 7 years a sabbatical.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I used to work for the University of Washington School of Business. Now, as an adjunct faculty, I was there 11, 12 years. I'm only teaching one class a quarter. I never had a sabbatical, but
Yeah.
you're tenured. What is it? Every 7 years, they take
Yeah.
a 1-year sabbatical.
Well, for a while, it was sort of fashionable, especially in Silicon Valley, for people to take sabbaticals, and some companies to attract top talent would offer these sabbaticals. But what I found,
You shared that doesn't work.
no, it absolutely doesn't work. That's the problem. And I've had clients who have taken them and 90-day sabbaticals. I had a client in Poland that took a 6-month sabbatical and came back to work every bit as burned out, every bit as stressed out, every bit as exhausted. And it seems like it should work. The problem is that, again, burnout is an inside job. It's not about, except in the exceptions that I mentioned. I mean, if you're working in a terrible, toxic environment, that's one thing. But for 80% or 90% of the cases, it's an inside job. It's what we carry around between our ears. And a sabbatical won't help. If anything, it'll make it worse. And in fact, what typically happens at the end of the sabbatical is that the employee quits anyway. So, it's not necessary. But on the one hand, and on the other, there's a much, much better solution that is proven to work.
That's great. So we're going to talk in a minute a little bit more about the book and how people where they can find the book. So you also talk about rebooting and key people you can't afford to fire, but they're hard to keep. So give us an example of rebooting. It sounds like you're
Sure.
rebooting a key person, but I'm assuming you could also reboot yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's really what this is all about, is to reboot ourselves or key people. I mentioned the instance recently. We're working with a client who has an essential employee that would take months and months to replace, if they even could replace them. So they have a vested interest in retaining this person. And the question is, how to do it. And so we have this executive reboot program that basically what we do is say to the employer and to the key executive, look, this is a proven process that we can take you through if you're willing to do that. And sometimes, and both the employer and the key executive both have to be willing to do this. But when the alternative is to spend $200,000 or lose $2 million in sales or other costs by replacing the person, it sometimes makes a lot of sense to at least look at this. So if I can get both the employer and the key leader to say, yes, I'm willing to give this a shot, I'm willing to give this a very sincere shot, then in most cases it is possible. In fact, we found that it's always possible if both parties are willing. And basically, typically we look at burnout usually as one of the main things that we look at. When people's behavior or performance drops off suddenly, a key contributor suddenly becomes a headwind instead of a tailwind. That's when we get involved. And what we've found is that if both parties are willing, and in most cases both people really do want this to work, that we have great success in rebooting people. And part of it is the burnout breakthrough system. For sure, we customize this to fit the leaders. Often the problem is that the leader does not have enough formal leadership training. They're a great doer, but they don't necessarily have the skills and experience to also be a great leader. So we also have a leadership development program that gives a very concentrated dose of very specific techniques that really work and can prevent things like micromanagement, for example, which is the chief way to torpedo your leadership career.
Yeah. And I would think that type of leadership training is going to establish a less toxic or a less dysfunctional environment. One of my favorite books is Patrick Lencioni, The Five Dysfunctions of a
Yeah.
Team.
Great book.
And really it starts with, it starts with the top person usually. And
Yes,
they're the
exactly.
ones in charge of setting the culture and all that. So you gave us one of the 5 steps, those counterintuitive steps, and that's the R&R technique.
Right.
I'm going to suggest that people buy your book to learn about the other 4. How is that for a
Thank you.
plug? So
Thank
how
you.
how can people get the book? Is it on Amazon? Where
Yes,
can they
it's
find it?
on Amazon. It's on Audible, the recorded version. You
Yeah,
can also go to burnoutbreakthrough.com, and there is a bigger explanation of what the program is, but there's a lot of other resources. You can get a PDF of the book. That's sort of the fastest, cheapest way to go at burnoutbreakthrough.com. But there's also lots of other content. A lot of it is free. Some of it has a nominal cost. But yeah, either on Amazon, Audible, or burnoutbreakthrough.com are the best places to go.
outstanding. Well, I highly recommend it. I haven't gotten through the whole book yet, but I highly recommend it. And I know that you have some tools as we're closing here. You have some tools. One of them is that calculator that
Yes.
helps you determine what losing a key person could actually cost you. And then you also, don't you have some form of an assessment
Yes.
that
Yeah.
people can take?
Yes.
So and I know that on your contact page, you've got a form people can fill out. Is that the best way to reach out to you
Yes.
so that you can get them these links?
Exactly. Yeah, we'll send some of the links for you so that you can have them in the notes. And but yes, if they want to, we have a lot of free content and free tools that we would love to share with people. And so, yeah, just contact us that way. That's the best idea.
That's fantastic. And you can, I know that I follow you on LinkedIn. I follow Double Dare on LinkedIn. And, you can find Scott Anderson Double Dare. If you type that into the search, Scott's going to be at the top of that search page. So there's another way to kind of connect. Well,
Thanks,
Scott,
Andrew.
this has been a real treat. I can completely get now. I had forgotten that you had a degree in counseling, and I completely see that in your work. And I think that that's just a tremendous asset. So you know how to find Scott. You know how to find his book. I totally recommend that you get You're Not Toast. And if you can't see this through our podcast here, this is literally a burnt piece of toast.
Yes,
When I first saw it, just absolutely cracked me up. It's better than my finger on my book.
not at
So,
all.
Scott, that's just tremendous. I thank you so much for
Thank you, Andrew.
coming on the show. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. Again, you've enjoyed hearing Scott Anderson on our Value Factory podcast presented by One Accord. I am your host, Andrew Ballard, wishing you a great week. So let's grow. Goodbye, everybody.